Watchmen is one of the most popular and influential comic books ever, written in the 80s by English wizard Alan Moore. It's a superhero story that questions the very idea of a hero, symbolized by that iconic, bloody smiley face. The Smiley, a simplistic cartoon, represents the optimism of comic books where good guys fight bad guys, and no one really dies.
Boring!
Watchmen splashes that smiley with blood, adding flawed human characters, moral ambiguity, politics, philosophy, and a darkness that was unusual in comics at the time. Of course, nowadays, everything's a dark, gritty reimagining of superheroes, but Watchmen did it before it was cool, and it still stands as a complex story about power, morality, fantasy, and giant psychic squids. So, what happens in the original Watchmen, and what does it mean? The story is set in an alternate 80s America where superheroes exist. None of them have superpowers, they're just vigilantes in costumes. Except for Dr. Manhattan, who has all the powers, except pants. With Manhattan's help, America won the Vietnam War, and Richard Nixon is still president, now on his 5th term. A hero called the Comedian does dirty work for the government, and it's hinted that he covered up the Watergate scandal, which in the real world ended Nixon's presidency. Superheroes changed the course of history and culture. The hero Silk Spectre was a celebrity and sex symbol in the 40s, and Ozymandias built a corporate empire selling action figures of himself. Because of all the real superheroes, people lost interest in superhero comics, so comics about pirates became popular instead. Thanks to Dr. Manhattan, technology is more advanced. 80s New York has electric cars and airships, and people eat genetically modified four-legged chicken. In the 70s, heroes were outlawed, so most retired. Only Manhattan and the Comedian are allowed to keep working for the government. When the story begins, tension is rising in the Cold War between America and Russia. Everyone fears nuclear annihilation. The doomsday clock approaches midnight, and the Comedian is mysteriously killed. The murder is investigated by Rorschach, a hero who refused to retire. On the surface, Rorschach is like Batman. He lurks in the shadows, beats up criminals, and says edgy stuff in a gravelly voice. But by day, Batman is Bruce Wayne, a sexy genius billionaire, while Rorschach is Walter Kovacs, a greasy loner weirdo who walks the streets with a sign saying, "The end is nigh." Realistically, the sort of person who dresses up and fights people at night isn't a functional person. He's a nutcase. Rorschach is an asocial, violent psycho with an extreme worldview. He thinks all of society is filthy and sinful and doesn't deserve mercy. His black and white mask reflects his black and white morality. Everything is either good or evil, and evil must be punished. He says he never compromises in his judgment, but he's often biased. For instance, when he hears the Comedian did something terrible to Silk Spectre, he doesn't care because he sees the Comedian as a patriot and Silk Spectre as a whore. Rorschach is psychologically disturbed by issues related to intimacy. As a kid, his mother was abusive, and he saw her working as a prostitute. This experience filled him with hatred and disgust, which he expresses by fighting criminals. Rorschach became a vigilante when he heard about Kitty Genovese, a real-world murder victim in the 60s. He was still a rational person back then until he discovered the savage murder of a child. Rorschach saw the darkest side of humanity, and it broke him, convincing him that the world is random, godless, and has no meaning except what we choose to impose. The only way Rorschach could save himself from despair and trauma was to impose his brutal ideology, punishing evil no matter the cost, which often just causes more suffering. He routinely gets information by breaking random people's fingers until he hears something useful. He terrorizes a sick old man, breaks into people's houses, and eats all their beans.